How can we as individuals change the conversations around birth?
Well, I think that most women who are pregnant should always look at midwifery. I think that we'll have better outcomes when that's done, and I think that if the next generation of people sees more people going to midwives, and will only continue to snowball. I think that we as midwives and as practitioners in the home birth, we need to not do to the hospital birthing people what they do to us. We need to maintain the higher road. Mm. It's not inappropriate to badmouth or even on my podcast, I have a segment that I use sometimes. I call it the dumb doctor dogma segment, and I'll read something that was really stupid that the doctor did, but it's not to insult. I don't use names usually, but it's just to point out some of the dumb things that happen, but not to belittle and ridicule and try to discourage people from choosing that option. We want them to have all options. And I think that hiring a doula is something that people can do to advocate for them in the hospital model. But ultimately, we need to get normal birthing out of the hospital. And the only way to get normal birthing out of the hospital is to create an alternative to the hospital for birthing that isn't just the home, because right. I don't think that you're ever going to find a majority of people feeling safe in the home. But we need to find a place that's sort of in between. And I'm not talking about a hospital-attached birthing center, because that's going to be something that is just going to follow the hospital rules and guidelines. Mm-hmm. It's going to have to be a new model. And the example I sometimes use for this is that when I was a kid growing up, food was just food. And you went to the market and tomatoes were tomatoes. And maybe there were 3 kinds of tomatoes, and that was it. Okay. And you had there's no such thing as organic. There was no such thing as like hybrid or GMO or all that stuff. Food was just food. And then the food industry changed. And why did it change? It changed because something called Whole Foods came along, I believe, and changed the way we shop for food. And then, we had other markets that came along too. They came where you could buy a beautiful lunch at your grocery store. They're organic food. They had health food. They had healthy stuff. And so what happened now is Ralph's and Vons, and I don't know what the markets are in Atlanta, the big chain ones, Kroger's, whatever they are. Mm-hmm. They all changed. They all now have a place where you can buy a nice nourishing lunch, and they all have an organic section, mm-hmm. and they have a organic fruit section. Are you really getting organic fruit? I don't know. Are you really getting pesticide-free fruit? I don't know. I mean, do insects know boundaries? Do insects not fly from the farm with the Roundup to the farm without the Roundup? I mean, I don't know. I mean, so I don't know but it changed the way we did things. Mm-hmm. Just as Starbucks or McDonald's changed the way we got food. And what else in the medical world, what changed surgery in the hospital, which was cumbersome and your cases were delayed and they were always bumped for emergencies and stuff like that, was these guys created things called surgery centers, freestanding surgery centers. And they ran on time, and they were efficient, and they were easy for the client to get in and client to get out. And parking was free and blah. And they ran these surgery centers, and they took all the minor surgeries and the money-making things from the hospital, and they started to go to these private surgery centers. And sometimes they were so lucrative that certain doctors, like plastic surgeon, whatever, had their own operating room in their own office, because they found a way to do that. So what did hospitals have to do? Hospitals had to compete with that. So hospitals began forming their own sort of surgery centers. Eventually, they just bought up all the surgery centers. And so now they own the surgery centers. But it changed surgery from this cumbersome thing, coming in the night before, not eating all night long, having your 7:30 case starting at 20 minutes after 8. And then your whole day is screwed up because everything is pushed back and bumped. And the hospital not caring, because they're the hospital and you have a private office and all your patients are moved. They didn't care. So there was competition. What we need in obstetrics is competition with the hospital model. And if I were the chief financial officer of a hospital, I don't know why they're so recalcitrant to the idea of forming a breech center or a twin center. mean, in Los Angeles, my God, in Los Angeles County alone, there's about 120,000 births a year. That means there's over 4,000 breech births a year. All right. If you could get 10% of those, that's 400 breaches. That's over 30 a month at your institution. Think about how much you could teach.
Yeah.
If you got residents that spent 2 months with you and you're doing 30 a month and they were on half the time, they could see 15 breaches a month. They'd see 30 in 2 months.
Wow.
They would be quite comfortable doing breaches, but you'll never be comfortable when the only breaches they're seeing are coming out by cesarean section.
Sure.
Or we need somebody like, and excuse me for referring to these people because I don't like them, but somebody like George Soros or Bill Gates or Bezos or somebody who's got billions and billions of dollars to decide, you know what, rather than putting it into the things they're putting it into, and I'll avoid anything else about that, why not putting it into the most important thing that our country could possibly do, at least from a medical standpoint, and that's make birth better.
Right.
By starting a new system of how we give birth, having a new institutions, having birthing facilities. Don't call them birth centers, don't call them hospitals, because those connotations are already taken.
Yeah.
But you come up with a clever idea and you franchise it. Open one. If you want to open one in Seattle, open one in San Francisco, open one in Los Angeles. Start there and see how it works. Have an operating room in it, right? But let women come there with all their stuff.
Yeah.
Their roller balls and their rebozos and their all that stuff, and they bring their stuff with them, and they can go in a room and they can labor by themselves with their birth team. And you don't necessarily have to have privileges there, that they can bring any midwife they want there with them, or they can do some credentialing, fine. But once you start down that credentialing road, then you start down all the things that turn it into a hospital. Will happen. So, you have to keep lawyers out of the picture, because risk managers, their goal is not the same goal as those of the practitioners and the patients or the clients. Their goal is, I always say this, is to have a baby in the bassinet.
Yep.
How it gets in the bassinet, a crying baby in the bassinet, how it gets there is not their concern. And what happens to that baby later, and what happens to that mother now, or what happens to that mother in the future and all her future babies is not their concern.
Right.
All their concern is avoiding liability on this one baby. And so how it gets there is nothing. And so you've got to get those kind of people with that kind of mind and not let them through the door. Have a big red circle with a line through it going through, whatever you want, and not let those people come in.
Yeah.
It's the same thing that we see with the pandemic right now, where virologists and epidemiologists have one thing to do. They want to prevent death. So all the collateral damage from lockdowns and vaccines, pro or con, or the rushing to do these sorts of things, whether you like them or not, and all the things that they're doing, and maybe the deaths from suicide, and the deaths from drug overdose, and the deaths from loneliness, and having old people dying without ever seeing their family members or touching their grandchildren or whatever. All that's collateral damage. Doesn't matter to them.
Yeah.
All that matters is we keep deaths at the lowest point. It's the same sort of thinking that we have in obstetrics, in the medical model. And that's why, to come full circle, the medical model needs to be put in the trash heap of history. And we need a new model for care, but it's going to take a monumental effort, and it's going to take money. And it's going to take somebody who, doesn't Bill Gates have kids?
Right.
I mean, maybe he didn't think, maybe he thought the experience was great. I mean,
yeah.
Somebody really wealthy's got to have kids who had a bad experience in the hospital. Has to happen. So maybe it will happen. Maybe you putting this out in the ether will cause ripples. Everything that we do, you and I, causes ripples. Everything everybody does causes ripples.
Absolutely.
But this is going to cause a ripple, and maybe it'll fall in the ears of somebody else who says, yeah, I know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And then they'll reach out to the Doing It at Home podcast, and you'll get them on, or I'll get them on mine, and we'll see if we can't get something started. I mean, this is how movements start. This is how things change. But it has to change because we're doing so poorly.
Yeah.
And I look at other countries like Brazil or South Africa, and 80% of the women there are getting a C-section. They're being told that it's fashionable, and that anybody who goes into labor is because they're they're lower social economic class,
Yeah.
and the classy women don't have it, and that sort of thing. I mean,
That's wild.
it's I don't even think it's the end point there. I don't know whether that's money or idiocy or what, but you're messing with Mother Nature, and every time you do, there's ripples.
Yeah, absolutely.